Hello everybody, today I'd like to talk to you about dialectics. I've been watching a video that referenced the dialectical method to demonstrate one of its points, and I think it would be worth producing an explanation of what this theory is, as it's widely used today as a means of solving problems in the world, yet I think most people are unaware of that. So to begin with, I think it's worth defining the term. So dialectics comes ultimately from Socrates, who it's known from Socrates as a Socratic method, and it's employed as a method of constructive argument in order to discover the reality of things. It's often in the form of a statement being made, which is then offered up to constructive scrutiny, where the person who initially made the statement is disabused of the false notions of it and arrives at a more enlightened version of the truth. The point of this is to draw out false presuppositions, in other words, beliefs that are held without much rational basis, but they are perhaps commonly held, so they don't receive the scrutiny that they require to eliminate the falsehoods contained in them, but also to extract the value of them, so that we come to a point where we are enlightened and the falsehoods of our theories or our beliefs or statements are stripped away. And now this method is found in Hegel's philosophy, a German philosopher, where I think there's actually some false attribution to Hegel here. The modern understanding of dialectics is a threefold process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Now Hegel's usual terminology for this was abstract, negative, and concrete. A process where an idea or a thought goes from one point to the next, and again, like Socrates, arrives at a point where the negatives, the falsehoods are removed, but the fundamental positives of an idea, a suggestion, a belief are taken forward. All Hegel really did was to expand on Socrates. Now, I'm not an expert on Hegel. I'm not going to give a really long, detailed explanation of his philosophy because I wouldn't be able to, but that's the fundamental. And from Hegel, we do get this modern suggestion of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, which is normally defined as problem, reaction, solution, to give it a practical slant. But before we go into that, it's worth mentioning that Karl Marx, the communist philosopher, also employed the dialectic method. In fact, it was central to his theories. Marx came up with something that he called diamat, which is short for dialectical materialism, and in essence he believed that this was the process through which social progress has occurred through history. To give it a practical angle, it was applied to the interests of production and workers, which arrived at a new method of production through the antagonistic relationship between the owners and the workers. Now this was developed in the USSR further under Joseph Stalin. They came up with some harebrained theories about it. But the difference between Marxian dialectics and Socratic and Hegelian is that Marx, as the name suggests, dialectical materialism, it was a purely materialistic philosophy. It didn't really, to any depth, question abstract fundamentals of ideas, but more practical processes in which tangible material factors of society change and move forward. It's interesting that it's through this method that the Marxists come to the theory that communism is the logical endpoint of human development. I'm probably going to butcher their theory because I don't have the precise information in front of me, but it essentially boils down to primitive societies, hunter-gatherers and so on, were proto-communist in the Marxist worldview. And as technology advanced and a distinction was made between owners and workers and so on and so forth, we go through various stages of development, through pastoralism, agriculture, and then to feudalism, to modern bourgeois capitalism. However, the Marxian communist view is that these dialectical processes whereby the owning class and the working class have antagonisms between them will eventually result in the logical conclusion being communism as the end state. Now, we can dispute whether that's true or not, but I think it's worth laying that out just to emphasize the materialist nature of this process and precisely how it works, because I think Marx is the best at giving practical examples of how dialectics work in the world. Now, we see dialectics all around us, and it could be argued that it is a very natural way of solving problems. When a natural problem in society occurs, then that's the thesis, and the reaction is the antithesis, which is here's a way to solve the problem, and the synthesis is putting them together to solve the problem. You could probably apply this to medicine in a way where a disease appears, and to prevent people dying of it, then medication is created, which is applied to the problem, and the synthesis is a population that gets sick but is medicated and therefore gets better. Now, that's a very simplistic example. I'm going to give another one in a minute to differentiate between different types of dialectics. But you can see how it works from that. Now, I believe that there are two types of dialectic really at play in society. I don't think it's worth differentiating between materialist dialectics and other forms. I think what we essentially have are healthy dialectics, which would be, the medical example would be classed as that, and an unhealthy dialectic. The difference between the two, an unhealthy dialectic, it still possesses the same qualities, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, yet it's manufactured. The overarching principle of an unhealthy dialectic is an agenda. An agenda is the preconceived notion which requires a manufactured dialectic to get to the desired conclusion. I'll give you another simplistic example with a pen. So take, for example, a blue biro. Let's say everybody writes in blue biro, but it's discovered that the blue pigment in the ink is actually carcinogenic and it's very dangerous. So the reaction is to devise a red pen with a different pigment that doesn't possess the same health risks. The synthesis, the solution, is that everybody starts using a red pen instead. We can all still write with a biro, we're just using a safer ink. Therefore, you have solved the problem through a dialectic. The converse to that is an unhealthy dialectic. For instance, let's say I own a factory that manufactures red pens, and I think that I can make a lot of money by selling everybody red pens, except everybody likes writing with blue pens. It's the socially accepted colour to write with. So my agenda is to create a situation whereby people feel they need to buy my red pen. So I might put a theory out there that the blue pigment is carcinogenic. It's not. I'm lying. I'm making it up. But I'm manufacturing this dialectic so that people arrive at the logical conclusion that they should buy my red pen. The most pernicious aspect of that is that when they buy the red pen, they'll think it's their idea. Now that is the crucial component of an unhealthy dialectic, is that a solution is arrived at where the majority of people accept it as the right solution, and they think it's their idea, but it's been put there by somebody or a group of somebodies with an agenda to sell their product or to advance their idea, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be a materialist principle, but that's what I believe an unhealthy dialectic is. Now, I don't want to go too far into examples with this, because I think people who think about it and look at the world and think about the world would be able to analyze what they see around them and identify where this occurs and where healthy dialectics occur and where unhealthy dialectics occur. But I will give one example which I think a lot of people will be familiar with. and that's the notion of terrorism. Now, I'm not going to speculate as to the organic or otherwise nature of terrorism, but it's widely believed, shall we say, that terrorism is a useful tool by governments to restrict the freedoms of their citizens. You saw this in America, whereby after 9/11, the Bush administration passed the Patriot Act, which most senators, by their own admission, never read, but it contained the most stringent restrictions on freedoms of average Americans that have ever been imposed. That wouldn't have been possible had it not been for 9/11, because everybody seemed to go crazy after 9/11. Now, you can argue as to whether that's a healthy or an unhealthy dialectic, whether it's a naturally occurring dialectic or an unnatural one. But just from that point, you can clearly see how the method could be abused to advance a certain aim whilst convincing the people that adopt it or support it that it's their idea and that it's good for them, when quite to the contrary it might not be. Now, I'll leave it to everybody else to perhaps identify where unhealthy dialectics are occurring in society. It's an interesting road to go down. Of course, you can get quite conspiratorial about these things, but I think it's fair to assume that when a dialectic is in play, which is in most efforts to solve problems, it's at least worth asking the question whether it's a natural or an unnatural, a healthy or an unhealthy dialectic that's taking place. Anyway, I hope you found this short explanation interesting. I hope you take the information away and learn more about it and see where it can be applied to the world. Thank you very much.